She saved 23 lives with her rifle, each shot fired with deadly precision and unwavering resolve. For years, her reputation as the sharpshooter who never missed made her a legend among those who knew her name. But beneath the steady hands and keen eyes lay a truth so shocking, it would change everything they thought they knew about her. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Death kept its own schedule in Redstone Valley. At precisely 700 hours, the first bullets shattered the morning silence, sending Sergeant John Smith and his Green Berets scrambling for cover. The crack of gunfire echoed through the canyon walls like thunder, amplifying the chaos as men dove behind whatever protection they could find. "Get down, contact high," John shouted, pressing himself against a boulder as rounds chipped away at the rock inches from his head. The morning mission, meant to be a routine patrol, had transformed into a nightmare in seconds. Pinned down in the narrow canyon, the team found themselves scattered and exposed. Lieutenant Michael Johnson slid into position beside John, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "They've got us boxed in, Sarge," he muttered, checking his ammunition with practiced efficiency. The enemy held the high ground with methodical precision, their fire patterns suggesting military training rather than the insurgent tactics they'd expected. Staff Sergeant William Miller crawled toward them, keeping his profile low as bullets kicked up dirt around him. "This wasn't in the briefing," William hissed, his eyes scanning the ridgelines where muzzle flashes betrayed enemy positions. "Someone fed us bad intel." John keyed his radio, desperate for a situation report from the rest of his scattered team. "Bravo 2, Bravo 3, report positions." Static crackled back at him before Specialist Robert Davis's voice broke through. "Bravo 2 here. We're pinned behind the eastern outcrop. Thomas took a graze to the arm, but he's operational." Private Thomas Martin, the youngest on the team, was on his first deployment. John gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of responsibility pressed down harder than the tactical vest on his chest. "Bravo 3, report," John demanded, but only intermittent static answered. The radio fell silent as another volley of gunfire forced them deeper into cover. Michael peered carefully around the edge of the boulder, then pulled back as bullets ricocheted dangerously close. "I count at least 15 hostiles, maybe more. They've got us surrounded on 3 sides." The echoes of gunfire bounced off the rock walls, creating a disorienting cacophony that made it impossible to pinpoint exact enemy positions. John barked into his radio again, requesting air support, but the news coming back was grim. No assets available for at least 40 minutes. "They knew we were coming," William said, his voice low and tight. "Perfect positioning, perfect timing." John nodded grimly, the realization settling like a stone in his gut. The carefully planned patrol route, the timing of their arrival in the canyon, everything pointed to one inescapable conclusion. "We walked right into a trap," he confirmed, checking his weapon and scanning for any possible escape route. But the high ground belonged to the enemy, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the valley floor where his men lay exposed and vulnerable, with nowhere to run. 3 kilometers north, Technical Sergeant Sarah Brown positioned herself on a rocky outcrop, her trained eye never leaving the scope of her standard-issue spotting equipment. Every muscle in her body remained perfectly still, despite the tension coursing through her veins. The morning air bit at her exposed skin, but she barely noticed, focused entirely on the unfolding disaster below. She had already completed her assigned mission, evacuating 2 wounded soldiers to the medevac point. But something had pulled her back. A gut feeling, an instinct honed through years of service that whispered something wasn't right. So she had disobeyed direct orders to leave with the transport, instead slipping away to this vantage point where she could monitor the situation. Through her scope, Sarah watched in growing horror as Sergeant Smith's team scattered for inadequate cover. The hostiles had positioned themselves perfectly, holding all tactical advantages in the narrow canyon. The Green Berets were fish in a barrel. "Watchdog to Bravo Actual," she transmitted, her voice betraying none of the anxiety churning inside her. "You've got hostiles flanking your 6. Need immediate exfil." Her training as a pararescue specialist had taught her to remain calm in chaos. It was often the difference between life and death. John's response crackled through her radio, the static doing little to mask the desperation in his voice. "Negative on exfil. We're pinned down. Medevac already departed." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, weighing her options and the consequences that would follow. What she was considering would violate protocols, regulations, and direct orders. Her gaze drifted to her rucksack, where a custom rifle case lay hidden beneath standard medical supplies. Equipment she had no authorization to carry on this mission. The decision crystallized in her mind. 23 lives saved so far, each one represented by a small notch on her weapon. Each one a promise kept to her father's memory. "Hold position," she transmitted back to John, her voice steady as she reached for the concealed case. "Help is coming." With practiced efficiency, Sarah assembled her unauthorized rifle, checking each component with the familiarity of someone who had performed this ritual countless times. The weight of it felt right in her hands, a forbidden comfort in a world of strict regulations. As she settled into position and began calculating wind speed, distance, and bullet drop, Technical Sergeant Brown knew she was crossing a line from which there would be no return. Her secret skills, the ones the Air Force officially denied she possessed, were about to be revealed. "I'm in position," she whispered into her radio, bracing herself against the stock. "Stand by." What would happen in the next few minutes would become the stuff of whispered legend among Special Forces operators for years to come. Specialist Robert Davis pressed a makeshift bandage against Lieutenant Michael Johnson's shoulder, his trained hands working methodically despite the chaos around them. Blood seeped through the fabric, staining Robert's fingers as he applied more pressure. "We need to move before they close the northern gap," Michael gasped, his face pale with pain, but his eyes clear and focused. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he tried to sit up straighter against the jagged rock wall. John Smith shook his head firmly. "Not yet. That's exactly what they want." The sergeant's voice remained steady, but the tightness around his eyes betrayed his concern. He peered cautiously around their meager cover, assessing the terrain with practiced efficiency. Staff Sergeant William Miller slid into position beside them, sending a small cascade of pebbles down the canyon wall. His expression darkened as he repeatedly tried to establish contact through his communication device. "Comms are jammed," William reported, his voice a harsh whisper. "Someone's blocking our signal. No way to call for backup or air support." No way. He checked his ammunition with a grim efficiency that spoke volumes about their situation. Robert glanced up from his work on Michael's wound. "How bad is it out there?" "Bad enough," William replied, exchanging a meaningful look with John. "They've got us surrounded on 3 sides. Only the northern corridor remains partially clear, but they're moving to close that too." Michael winced as Robert tightened the bandage. "We can't stay here. We're sitting ducks." "Moving means dying," John stated flatly, "at least until something changes the equation." He surveyed his team with the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. David Evans and Thomas Martin had taken positions several yards away, maintaining a fragile perimeter that wouldn't hold for long. Thomas, the youngest of the group, kept glancing nervously toward John, clearly seeking reassurance the seasoned sergeant couldn't honestly provide. The private's hands trembled slightly on his weapon, though he fought to control it. William checked his watch. "If we don't move in the next 15 minutes, we won't be moving at all." The distant crack of gunfire punctuated his words, followed by the distinctive ping of bullets striking rock uncomfortably close to their position. Everyone instinctively pressed themselves flatter against the canyon wall. "Options?" Robert asked, finally securing the bandage around Michael's shoulder. John's radio crackled with static, another failed attempt to reach anyone outside the canyon. The team fell silent, the weight of their predicament settling over them like a shroud. The enemy shadow crept closer with each passing minute, the noose tightening around their position. Each man looked to John for a miracle, But the sergeant's grim expression offered little hope. Unless something changed dramatically, and soon, Redstone Valley would become their final resting place. With practiced hands, Sarah Brown unfolded the bipod of her custom-marked rifle, the metal cool against her fingertips. 23 notches marked the barrel, not kills, but lives saved. Each groove represented someone who'd made it home because of her intervention. A tally she kept not out of pride, but as a solemn record of promises kept. She settled into position on the rocky outcrop, her breathing slowing to a measured rhythm. The valley stretched before her, a killing field where John's team remained trapped. The technical sergeant calculated wind speed, elevation, and distance, a brutal 2-kilometer shot that would challenge even the most elite marksman. Inhale, hold, exhale halfway, she whispered to herself, the mantra her father had taught her years ago. The world narrowed, peripheral vision fading as her focus tunneled down to her crosshairs. Time seemed to slow as she identified the enemy commander, gesturing orders from his position on the ridge. With a single deliberate squeeze, her rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the canyon walls. Through her scope, she watched the commander collapse instantly, a perfect shot that left his subordinates momentarily frozen in confusion. "Target down," she murmured into her radio, already adjusting her aim for the next threat. Down in the canyon, Sergeant Smith watched in disbelief as the enemy's coordinated attack suddenly dissolved into chaos. The Green Beret team leader recognized their window of opportunity immediately. "Move now," John shouted, his voice cutting through the momentary lull in gunfire. "Miller, take point. Davis, help Johnson." The team broke cover, with William leading the way toward a cluster of boulders 30 meters ahead. Robert supported the wounded lieutenant, half carrying him across the exposed ground while David provided covering fire. From her elevated position, Sarah tracked a hostile fighter swinging his weapon toward the exposed soldiers. Her second shot rang out, dropping the threat before he could fire. Then a third shot, and a fourth, each bullet precisely placed, each creating another gap in the enemy's defense. "2 more at your 3 o'clock, she radioed calmly, her voice steady despite the stakes. John directed Thomas and the others through the corridor Sarah was carving with her rifle. The private moved with newfound confidence, trusting in the unseen guardian providing their overwatch. "Who is that?" Thomas asked between breaths as they reached the relative safety of the new position. John merely shook his head, watching as another enemy fighter fell to Sarah's precision. "Someone who just saved our lives." As the team regrouped behind cover, Sarah marked her mental tally. 4 more lives saved today, 4 more notches to add when, if, they all made it home. She chambered another round, knowing the fight was far from over. Every bullet that left Technical Sergeant Sarah Brown's rifle bought precious seconds the Green Berets desperately needed. The crack of her weapon echoed across the canyon, each shot finding its mark with surgical precision. Her unseen hand had turned what should have been a massacre into something else entirely, a narrow corridor of hope, where moments before there had been only the certainty of death. From her elevated position, Sarah tracked movement through her scope, watching as John's team used her covering fire to advance toward better shelter. The pararescue specialist allowed herself a fleeting moment of satisfaction as another hostile dropped, adding to her mental tally. 24 now, she thought, though she wouldn't add the notch to her rifle until they were safely extracted. The enemy forces, initially disorganized by her unexpected intervention, began adapting with alarming speed. They scattered, using the rocky terrain for cover, communicating with hand signals to avoid her deadly accuracy. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, compensating for the shifting wind that threatened to throw off her calculations. "I've got your overwatch," she whispered into her radio, voice steady despite the tension coiling through her body. "Hostiles moving at your 10 o'clock, using the boulder formation for cover." There was a pause on the other end before Sergeant Smith's voice crackled through, confusion and disbelief evident in his tone. "Sarah, weren't you with the wounded? I thought you evacuated with the medevac." The medic's eyes never left her scope as she tracked a fighter attempting to flank the team's position. She exhaled slowly, squeezing the trigger with practiced control. The hostile dropped instantly. "Change of plans," she replied simply, already shifting her aim to the next target. Down in the canyon, John exchanged glances with William, both men processing what this meant. The staff sergeant's expression darkened with suspicion, but there was no time to question their unexpected guardian angel. Whatever Sarah was doing, whatever rules she was breaking, was keeping them alive. Robert and David had managed to move Lieutenant Johnson behind a more substantial outcropping, the wounded officer gritting his teeth against the pain. Thomas kept watch on their six, the young private's hands steadier now that they had mysterious support from above. Sarah's voice came through again, calm and focused. "3 hostiles regrouping behind the eastern ridge. They're trying to circle around to cut off your exit route." John nodded to William, who immediately signaled to the others. They would need to move again soon. Sarah couldn't hold them all off forever. But for now, each precise shot from her rifle was a promise kept, a death sentence commuted, a chance at survival that none of them had dared hope for when the ambush began. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Brown had stood at rigid attention in Colonel Richard Clark's office at Fort Bragg. The morning light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across his polished desk. The colonel barely looked up from her file, his expression a practiced mask of indifference. "Technical Sergeant, your assignment is clear. Medical support only," he stated, sliding her orders across the desk. "The Green Berets have their own specialists for everything else." Sarah maintained her composure despite the familiar sting. "Sir, with respect, my marksmanship qualifications are impressive but irrelevant," Colonel Clark interrupted, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. "You're here to patch and transport. That's it. The combat teams don't need distractions." The unspoken message hung in the air between them. Female operators weren't welcome in certain circles, regardless of their skills. Sarah had encountered this resistance her entire career, first at Lackland during specialized training, then with every deployment since. "Do I make myself clear, Technical Sergeant?" the colonel asked, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Crystal clear, sir," Sarah replied, her voice betraying none of the frustration churning inside her. As she left his office, Sarah passed Staff Sergeant Miller in the hallway. William nodded curtly, his expression guarded. They'd crossed paths during a joint exercise the previous year, and she knew he remembered her, and probably the rumors that followed her between bases. Later that evening, alone in her quarters, Sarah had opened her footlocker and removed the custom rifle case hidden beneath regulation gear. Her fingers traced the 23 notches carved into the stock, each representing a life saved through her intervention. Not medical intervention, but the kind that came through precision and steel. She swallowed her frustration then, knowing she could do more than the system allowed. The military had trained her, then tried to contain her, uncomfortable with the weapon they'd created. Now, as Sarah worked her rifle with clinical precision in the unforgiving terrain of Redstone Valley, those forbidden skills were the only thing keeping John's team alive. Through her scope, she watched Sergeant Smith directing his men, his movements decisive despite their desperate situation. She spotted Robert tending to the wounded Lieutenant Johnson, while Thomas and David maintained their defensive positions. Each shot she took violated direct orders. Each life she saved was another mark against her career. But as the radio crackled with the sounds of the team regrouping, Sarah knew she'd made the only choice that mattered. Some rules were worth breaking when lives hung in the balance. Staff Sergeant William Miller pressed his back against the rough canyon wall, his breathing controlled despite the chaos around them. Cautiously, he peered around the jagged rocks, scanning the terrain with experienced eyes. "They're flanking us from the south ridge," William warned. ducking back as bullets chipped stone inches from his head. At least 7 hostiles moving into position. Sergeant John Smith nodded grimly, dirt and sweat streaking his face. He pressed the transmit button on his radio, desperation edging his voice. "Sarah, can you delay them?" John asked, knowing their survival hung by a thread. Technical Sergeant Sarah Brown's voice came through with a calm that belied the gravity of their situation. "I can do better than that." 2 kilometers away, Sarah adjusted her position, the custom-marked rifle steady against her shoulder. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighters moving with purpose along the narrow approach of the South Ridge. They were using the terrain well, but not well enough to hide from her trained eye. Sarah slowed her breathing, feeling the familiar rhythm settle over her. Inhale, hold, exhale halfway, pause. Her finger caressed the trigger as she lined up her first shot. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, its report echoing across the valley. 1 hostile dropped instantly. The others scattered, momentarily confused by the unseen threat. Sarah worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round. Her second shot found its mark, a fighter trying to coordinate the others. As he fell, she was already lining up her third target. Each shot was deliberate, each one a life-saving promise. In her mind, Sarah kept count, the tally matching the 23 notches already marked on her rifle's stock. Each one represented someone she'd saved, not someone she'd killed. That distinction mattered to her. Down in the canyon, John and his team used the precious seconds she bought them. Robert Davis and David Evans helped Lieutenant Michael Johnson to better cover, while Private Thomas Martin collected extra ammunition from their packs. "South approach clear," Sarah's voice crackled through the radio. "Moving to cover your eastern flank." William exchanged glances with John, a flicker of hope replacing the resignation that had settled in his eyes. "How is she doing this?" he whispered. John shook his head, focusing on reorganizing their defense. "I don't know, but she's buying us time." The Green Berets moved with renewed purpose, repositioning to maximize their defensive capabilities. What had seemed like certain death minutes ago now felt like a fighting chance. Sarah lined up another shot, her breathing steady. "2 more hostiles at your 2 o'clock, 300 meters, she reported. "I've got them." The rifle spoke twice more, and silence followed. Robert Davis and David Evans struggled to drag Michael Johnson deeper into the rocky alcove. The lieutenant's face was ashen, his uniform darkened with blood around the shoulder wound. But he managed a weak nod of thanks as they propped him against the canyon wall. "How's he doing?" John asked, crouching beside them. "Stable for now," Robert replied, tightening the field dressing. "But we need to get him proper medical attention within the next few hours." 20 meters away, William Miller and Thomas Martin worked frantically to establish a defensive position, stacking loose rocks and positioning their remaining ammunition for quick access. The young private's hands trembled slightly as he checked his weapon. "Didn't know medics could shoot like that," Thomas muttered. Eyes wide as another precise shot echoed through the canyon. He glanced toward the distant ridge where Sarah Brown had positioned herself. "That's her 4th kill in under 2 minutes, William grunted, unconvinced. "Something's not right. Pararescue jumpers don't train for this kind of precision work." John Smith said nothing, but suspicion gnawed at him as he watched another enemy fighter drop through his binoculars. Sarah wasn't just firing randomly. She was systematically dismantling the enemy force, prioritizing targets with tactical precision. First the commander, then the radio operator, followed by the heavy weapons specialist. Her shots came at calculated intervals, forcing the hostiles to keep their heads down while simultaneously eliminating their command structure. This wasn't standard protocol for Air Force medical personnel. This was the work of someone with advanced training, the kind of training that didn't appear in official records. "She's buying us time," John finally said, keeping his voice low so only William could hear. "But I want answers when we get out of this." The staff sergeant nodded grimly. "If we get out of this." Through his scope, John tracked Sarah's methodical progress. Each shot was placed with surgical precision, center mass or headshots, no wasted ammunition. The technical sergeant moved between firing positions with practiced efficiency, never staying in one spot long enough to draw a return fire. "Sarge," Robert called from Michael's side, "Lieutenant's asking how much longer we need to hold." John checked his watch, calculating distances and extraction possibilities. "Tell him we move as soon as Sarah clears that southern approach." As if on cue, the radio crackled. "Northern sector clear," Sarah's calm voice announced. "3 hostiles remaining at your 2 o'clock. I'll handle them, then guide you through the extraction corridor." John exchanged glances with William. The question hung unspoken between them. Who exactly was Technical Sergeant Sarah Brown? Vehicle approaching from the east, technical with mounted gun. Sarah's voice cracked through the radio, breaking the momentary silence. The urgency in her tone was unmistakable, despite her controlled delivery. John Smith's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what that meant. "Everyone down," he hissed to his team, pressing himself against the canyon wall. A 50 caliber mounted gun would shred their position in seconds, turning their rocky cover into deadly shrapnel. The Green Berets exchanged grim looks. Their already precarious situation had just become potentially fatal. Lieutenant Johnson, still bleeding from his shoulder wound, closed his eyes briefly as Robert tightened his bandage. "How long?" William asked, his knuckles white around his rifle. John didn't have time to answer. 2 distinct shots echoed across the canyon, sharp, precise cracks that seemed to hang in the air. The team tensed, waiting for the inevitable barrage of return fire. Instead, they heard the distinctive sound of an engine sputtering, followed by the metallic crash of a vehicle coming to an unplanned stop. "Vehicle blocked," Sarah reported through the radio, her voice as calm as if she were reporting the weather. "Driver and gunner neutralized. You've got approximately 3 minutes before the rest investigate." William Miller stared at his sergeant in disbelief. "That's at least 1,500 meters from her position. In this wind?" He shook his head. "Sarge, who is she?" John didn't answer immediately. He peered cautiously around the rock formation, confirming what Sarah had reported. The technical sat motionless, its hood smoking slightly, 2 figures slumped over. The perfect disable, no explosion to draw additional attention, no vehicle fire to create a beacon. "She just bought us time," John finally said, his voice low. He glanced toward the distant ridge where he knew Sarah was positioned, a new respect forming behind his professional demeanor. But with that respect came questions, the kind that military men learn to recognize as potentially dangerous. Thomas shifted nervously beside them. "I thought she was just a medic," he whispered. "Apparently not," Robert replied, exchanging a meaningful look with John. John keyed his radio. "Thanks for the assist, watchdog. We're repositioning now." He motioned to his team, indicating their next move. "Focus on getting out alive. Questions come later." Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction as she marked another notch on her rifle. The metal was warm beneath her fingertips as she etched the small line with practiced precision. 23 marks now, 23 lives saved by her hand. She keyed her radio, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Northern corridor clearing. Move in 3 mics," she transmitted to John's team below. The technical sergeant swept her scope across the terrain once more, methodically checking each sector. The morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon walls, creating a deceptive landscape of light and dark. Her trained eye caught something, a flicker of movement where there should be none. Sarah adjusted her scope, focusing on the eastern ridge. "Damn it," she whispered. 3 vehicles were approaching from the distance, kicking up dust clouds that betrayed their rapid advance. Through her scope, she counted at least 12 new hostiles, heavily armed and moving with purpose. Reinforcements. The enemy wasn't giving up. Sarah calculated rapidly. John's team had a small window of opportunity, but it was closing fast. These newcomers would flank the Green Berets before they could reach safety. The pararescue specialist made her decision in seconds. She disassembled her custom rifle with swift, economical movements. Each component found its place in the specialized case, a ritual she'd performed countless times since her secret training. Her father had taught her that a sniper's greatest asset wasn't just accuracy, but knowing when to change position. "Watchdog to Bravo Actual," she radioed. "Situation changing. Multiple hostiles approaching from East Ridge. ETA 7 minutes. PG on Bravo." John's voice crackled back, tense but controlled. "Copy. Options." Sarah secured her case, checking her sidearm and medical kit. "Hold position. I'm coming down." She didn't wait for his response. This wasn't protocol. She was supposed to maintain overwatch, not engage directly. But Sarah knew the terrain better than anyone. The team would need a guide, not just covering fire. As she began her descent, navigating the treacherous path down the canyon wall, Sarah pushed away thoughts of Colonel Clark's explicit orders. She could already hear William's skepticism, the questions that would follow. How did a medic know these canyons? Where did she learn to shoot like that? The answers were locked away with her past, with the battered Sierra team patch hidden in her vest pocket. Some secrets were worth keeping, even from allies. But right now, John's team needed more than a guardian angel on the ridge. They needed someone who could lead them through hell. Sarah checked her watch. 3 minutes until the team would move. 5 minutes until the reinforcements would have them in range. She quickened her pace, sliding down a scree slope toward the canyon floor. This time, she would guide them out herself, even if it meant breaking every rule she'd sworn to obey. John Smith's team had mere minutes to breathe before the enemy would regroup. The temporary advantage Sarah had given them was already slipping away as distant shouts echoed through the canyon walls. The Green Berets huddled behind it. One by one, his men responded, all except Sarah. Her radio had gone silent. "Sarah, do you copy?" John tried again, tension creeping into his voice. Nothing but static answered him. William Miller crawled closer, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "She's gone dark. Could be equipment failure, or..." He left the darker possibilities unspoken. "Or she's repositioning," John countered, refusing to entertain alternatives. "She knows what she's doing." Robert Davis finished securing a fresh bandage on Michael Johnson's shoulder. The lieutenant winced but remained silent, his complexion alarmingly pale. Robert caught John's eye and gave a subtle head shake. Michael needed evacuation soon. "We're trusting her?" Robert finally asked, voicing the question hanging in everyone's mind. Someone we barely know, who appeared out of nowhere with skills that we're trusting her. We're trusting her. Or, she's repositioning. I left the darker possibilities unspoken. Or she's repositioning. She knows what she's doing. What's going on? That. He trailed off, glancing toward the ridgeline where Sarah had been positioned. John surveyed his team, wounded, exhausted, and running low on ammunition. Then he looked toward the northern pass, their only viable escape route. 200 meters of exposed terrain stretched before them. A killing field, if they attempted to cross without cover. "She's earned it," John replied, grit in his voice. His hand unconsciously touched the spot where a bullet would have found him if not for Sarah's intervention. 20 minutes ago, we were dead men. Now we have a chance. Thomas Martin, the youngest of the group, nervously checked his weapon. What if it's a trap? What if she's leading us into... If she wanted us dead, David Evans interrupted, she would have just let those hostiles finish the job. William remained skeptical but practical. "We don't have many options, Sarge. That pass is suicide without someone watching our backs." John nodded, studying the terrain through his binoculars. The path ahead offered no cover, no protection, certain death without the invisible shield Sarah had provided. But with her precision fire, impossible odds had a way of shifting. 5 minutes, John decided, checking his watch. If we don't hear from her by then, we make our own play. He turned to his team, his expression resolute. "But I believe she's out there, getting ready to clear our path." The team fell silent, each man lost in his own thoughts as the seconds ticked by. Their lives now hung on the skills of a pararescue specialist who had somehow transformed into their guardian angel, a woman whose secrets ran as deep as her determination to keep them alive. "This is suicide," Thomas muttered, crouching behind the jagged boulder that had become their temporary sanctuary. His young eyes scanned the exposed stretch of canyon floor ahead, 200 meters of open ground with minimal cover and maximum vulnerability. Michael Johnson, his uniform darkened with dried blood around his shoulder wound, managed a grim smile despite the pain etched across his face. "We've got no choice," he said, his voice steadier than his complexion. The lieutenant shifted against the rock, wincing as Robert readjusted the field dressing. John Smith checked his watch for the third time in 30 seconds. 4 minutes had passed since Sarah's last transmission, and the silence weighed on all of them. The sergeant's weathered face betrayed nothing, but his eyes constantly scanned the ridgelines, searching for any sign of their guardian angel. "Listen up," John finally said, gathering the team closer. "On my mark, we move as one unit. Miller and I take point, Davis and Evans on the lieutenant. Martin covers our 6. His tone left no room for debate. Single file, 5-meter spacing. Anyone gets hit, we keep moving until we reach that outcropping. He pointed to a distant formation of rocks that offered their only hope of cover. William Miller checked his ammunition. 3 magazines left, barely enough if they encountered serious resistance. "And if our guardian angel doesn't show?" he asked quietly, careful to keep his voice from carrying to the others. John met his gaze. "Then we make our own miracle, Staff Sergeant." Robert Davis finished securing Michael's bandage and helped him to a sitting position. "Sir, can you make it?" he asked, medical assessment mixing with genuine concern. The lieutenant nodded, determination overriding the pain. "Just get me on my feet when it's time." Thomas nervously checked his weapon again, the youngest member of the team, unable to hide his anxiety. David Evans placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stay focused on our 6, just like the sergeant said. We'll make it." The team fell into an uneasy silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. No one voiced the question hanging in the air. What had happened to Sarah Brown? The technical sergeant had appeared like a guardian spirit, her precision fire turning certain death into a fighting chance. Now her absence felt like a physical weight. John gave them 2 more minutes to prepare, then moved to the edge of their cover. He raised his fist, the universal signal to ready positions. One by one, the Green Berets lined up, muscles tensed and weapons ready. No one asked what would happen if Sarah didn't make it. They couldn't afford that kind of thinking now. The silence hung heavy as the team huddled behind the rocky outcrop. Staff Sergeant William Miller glanced nervously at the northern pass, then back at his comrades with suspicion clouding his features. "I don't like this," William finally said, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at everyone. "What if it's not Sarah? What if this is all a setup?" His hand tightened around his weapon as he scanned the ridgeline. Think about it. The ambush was too perfect. The precision fire from nowhere. None of this makes sense. The rest of the team exchanged uneasy looks. Specialist Robert Davis paused from checking Lieutenant Michael Johnson's bandages, his medical training temporarily overshadowed by tactical concerns. Even Thomas Martin, the youngest of their group, shifted uncomfortably, his inexperienced eyes darting between the senior team members for reassurance. "A trap within a trap," David Evans muttered, the possibility clearly disturbing him. It wouldn't be the first time. John Smith considered his team's concerns, weighing each possibility with the measured calculation of a seasoned Green Beret. The canyon wall seemed to close in around them as the seconds ticked by. Their position remained vulnerable, and doubt was as dangerous as any bullet. "Look at the facts," John finally said, his voice steady despite the tension. "If someone wanted us dead, they wouldn't have taken out half the enemy force first." He gestured toward the northern ridge where Sarah had been positioned. "Those shots saved our lives. Whoever's behind that rifle could have let us die a dozen times over." Michael winced as he shifted his wounded shoulder. John's right. He managed through gritted teeth. Those weren't random shots. Each one had purpose, clearing our path, taking out commanders first. That's what worries me, William countered. It's too perfect, too calculated. John checked his ammunition, a habit born from years in combat. We've got two choices. Trust that Sarah is exactly who she says she is and follow her lead, or sit here debating until the enemy regroups and finishes what they started. Robert finished securing Michael's bandage. Trust is a luxury out here, he said quietly. Right now, it's all we have, John replied, his gaze sweeping across his battered team. And I'd rather bet on Sarah than wait for certain death. William reluctantly nodded, the tactical reality overriding his suspicions. Fine, but I'm keeping my eyes open. That makes two of us, John agreed, checking his watch. 3 minutes until we move. Everyone check your gear. As the team prepared, each man knew they were placing their lives in the hands of a woman whose skills raised more questions than answers. Trust was indeed a luxury, but sometimes it was the only currency that mattered. 8 years earlier, Sarah Brown had stood on the firing line at Lackland Air Force Base, her boots planted firmly on the sun-baked concrete. The Texas heat shimmered above the range as 23 men and 1 woman waited for instructions. Sarah could feel the sideways glances, the quiet skepticism that followed her everywhere in this specialized marksmanship course. Master Sergeant James Black strode down the line, his weathered face a map of combat experience. He paused at Sarah's position, eyes narrowing as he assessed her stance. "Technical Sergeant Brown," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you understand this isn't basic qualification, right? This is precision shooting under combat stress conditions." "Yes, Master Sergeant," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "Let your shooting do the talking." Black handed her the rifle, standard issue, nothing like the custom weapon she would later mark with life-saving notches. 3 shots, center mass. Let's see what the Air Force rescue jumper can do. The range fell silent as Sarah took her position. She inhaled deeply, feeling 23 pairs of eyes boring into her back. The young woman adjusted her grip, remembering every lesson her father had taught her before his final deployment. She exhaled slowly, squeezing the trigger between heartbeats. 3 shots, 3 perfect hits, a grouping so tight the holes nearly overlapped. Black's expression shifted from skepticism to carefully masked surprise. "Again," he ordered, handing her a fresh magazine. Different target, different distance. By day's end, Sarah had outshot every man on the line. The instructor never apologized for his doubt. Men like Black rarely did, but something changed in how he addressed her. "Your form is textbook perfect, Brown. Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "My father taught me," she answered simply, not elaborating that her father had been one of the most decorated marksmen in Special Forces history. Over the next 8 weeks, Sarah excelled in every challenge Black threw at her. Night shooting, moving targets, extreme distances. By graduation, she'd earned not just her marksmanship badge, but something far more valuable, grudging respect that would follow her into every shadow operation she'd ever work. What none of her classmates knew was that this course was merely a formality. Sarah had been shooting since she could hold a rifle steady. Her father had trained her on remote Montana ranges, teaching her skills that went far beyond military doctrine, skills she kept carefully hidden until moments like the canyon, when lives hung in the balance and protocol became secondary to survival. That badge from Lackland became her official credential, but her true education had come from a ghost, a father whose legacy she carried into every battle, whose lessons would one day save John Smith's entire team. Sarah Brown moved like a shadow along the jagged canyon edge, her boots finding purchase on loose rocks that would have betrayed a less experienced operator. The valley below revealed John's team, 5 men huddled behind inadequate cover, their options dwindling with each passing minute. She caught the glint of sunlight on Specialist Robert Davis's helmet as he checked Lieutenant Johnson's bandages. Through her scope, Sarah spotted 3 hostiles advancing on the team's position. She keyed her radio. "Watchdog to Bravo Actual, I have eyes on you." John's voice crackled back, tense with suspicion. "Authenticate." Without hesitation, Sarah rattled off the day's mission credentials, operation code, and the classified extraction coordinates that only someone with legitimate clearance would know. Sierra Tango 479er, Operation Dustfall. Extraction point Whiskey Echo 3. A pause. Confirmed. What's your position? Northwest Ridge, 200 meters up. I count 3 hostiles approaching your 9 o'clock. Sarah settled into a prone position, the familiar weight of her rifle steadying her racing heart. She checked her remaining ammunition. Just 2 magazines left. 26 rounds to get 5 men through a killing field. "We're running out of options here," John replied. "Enemy reinforcements are 15 minutes out, tops." Sarah calculated distances, angles, and timing. "I can give you cover through the northern corridor. It's your only shot." Staff Sergeant William Miller's voice cut in. "That's 200 meters of open ground. We'll be slaughtered." "Not with me watching," Sarah answered, her confidence absolute. She'd made this promise 23 times before. Each notch on her rifle represented a life she'd saved when others said it couldn't be done. "On my mark," John finally decided. 3, 2, 1, move! The Green Berets broke from cover, William and John taking point while Robert and David Evans half-carried the wounded Michael between them. Thomas Martin covered their 6, firing sporadically to suppress any pursuit. Sarah's world narrowed to her scope, her breathing, and the threats materializing before her. Her first shot dropped a hostile emerging from behind a boulder. The second neutralized a gunner setting up on the eastern ridge. With each crack of her rifle, another threat disappeared. The team sprinted across the exposed ground, dust kicking up around their boots. A hostile appeared from nowhere, directly in their path. Sarah exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The man fell before he could fire a single round. "Keep moving," she urged through the radio. 50 meters to cover." As the team closed in on safety, Sarah tracked their progress, picking off 2 more hostiles attempting to flank from the west. Each shot was deliberate. Each life saved, another promise kept. When John's team finally reached the rocky outcropping that would shield them from enemy fire, Sarah allowed herself a single deep breath. They'd made it through hell, but the day was far from over. The open corridor had seemed like salvation, but halfway across, death appeared without warning. 3 armed fighters materialized from behind a rocky outcrop, their weapons trained directly on the exposed team. "Contact front," William Miller shouted, dropping to one knee and returning fire in controlled bursts. The rest of the team scattered for what little cover the terrain offered. But they were dangerously exposed in the open ground. Sarah Brown assessed the situation in seconds. The team was pinned down with Michael Johnson bleeding heavily, and their escape route was completely cut off. From her current position, she couldn't get a clean shot at all 3 hostiles. "Covering fire," she called to John Smith, who immediately understood. The sergeant laid down suppressive fire while Sarah slung her custom rifle across her back and began moving laterally along the ridge. "What is she doing?" Thomas Martin whispered, his young face pale with fear as bullets kicked up dust inches from his position. Robert Davis pulled the wounded lieutenant closer behind a small boulder. "Saving our lives, again," he answered, pressing fresh bandages against Michael's shoulder. Sarah scrambled across loose rocks, exposing herself to enemy fire as she sought a better firing angle. A bullet whizzed past her ear. Another tore through the fabric of her sleeve. She ignored both, focused entirely on reaching the jutting rock formation 20 meters to her right. Sliding into position, she unslung her rifle in one fluid motion, steadied her breathing, and found her first target through the scope. The hostile was moving to flank David and Robert. Sarah exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. 1 shot, 1 kill. She shifted immediately, finding the second fighter, who was now frantically searching for her position. Her second shot caught him center mass. He dropped without a sound. The third hostile was smarter, using the terrain for cover, but Sarah had anticipated his movement. When he broke cover for a better shooting position, her bullet found him before he could fire. 3 threats, 3 shots, 3 bodies on the ground. "Move, move, move," John bellowed, seizing the moment. William and Thomas surged forward first, establishing security at the next position. Robert and David half-carried Michael between them, the lieutenant gritting his teeth against the pain. John covered their retreat, occasionally glancing back toward Sarah's position. The technical sergeant was already on the move again, sliding down a scree slope to rejoin them, her rifle back across her shoulders. As the team pushed forward, William caught John's eye. "That's not standard pararescue training," he muttered, nodding towards Sarah as she caught up with them. John simply nodded. "Later," he said. "Right now, I don't care if she learned to shoot from aliens. She's the only reason we're still breathing." 5 minutes later, Sarah Brown rejoined the team behind a rocky outcrop, her movements swift and deliberate. Without a word, she knelt beside Lieutenant Michael Johnson, whose face had grown alarmingly pale. The makeshift bandage on his shoulder was soaked through with blood. "Let me see it," she said, gently peeling back the fabric. Michael winced but remained silent as the medic worked, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. She pulled fresh gauze from her kit and applied pressure to the wound. "You're lucky," Sarah told him. "Bullet passed clean through. No major arteries hit." Staff Sergeant William Miller watched from a few feet away, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. The rest of the team huddled nearby, catching their breath, weapons at the ready. William couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" he finally asked, his voice low enough that only their small group could hear. "They teaching medics sniper school now?" Sarah didn't look up from her work on Michael's shoulder. "Everyone has hidden talents, Staff Sergeant." "Talents?" William scoffed. "You dropped hostiles at 2 kilometers. That's not a talent. That's specialized training." John Smith stepped between them, his expression stern. "She just saved our lives. That's all that matters right now." "With all due respect, Sarge," William persisted, "I'd like to know who I'm trusting with my life." Sarah secured the fresh bandage on Michael's shoulder and helped him lean back against the rock. "How's the pain?" she asked, ignoring William's questioning. "Manageable," Michael replied through gritted teeth. Robert Davis moved closer, offering his canteen to the wounded officer. "Drink something, sir. You need fluids." The tension hung in the air as Sarah packed away her medical supplies. Thomas Martin and David Evans kept watch at the perimeter, occasionally glancing back at the unfolding confrontation. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before they regroup," Sarah said, checking her rifle. "We need to move soon." John nodded. "Agreed, but Miller has a point." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "You've proven yourself out there, but we're a team. No secrets." Sarah met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. For a moment, it seemed she might reveal everything. Instead, she checked her ammunition and said, "What matters is getting everyone home alive. I can do that." William opened his mouth to press further, but John silenced him with a raised hand. "We move in 5. Check your gear and rest while you can." As the team prepared to continue, Sarah felt the weight of their stares on her back. The notches on her rifle, 23 lives saved, carried a history she wasn't ready to share. Not yet. William Miller's eyes narrowed as he studied Sarah Brown. The team had found temporary shelter behind a cluster of boulders, but safety was relative in this hellscape. "How do you know this terrain so well?" he demanded, voice low but sharp. "No pararescue gets this kind of intel. You've been here before, haven't you?" Sarah's fingers checked Michael Johnson's bandages, her focus deliberately on the wounded lieutenant, rather than William's accusation. John Smith moved closer, clearly interested in her answer, but fate had other plans. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire shattered the moment. A 3-man patrol had appeared on the ridge above them, already taking aim. "Contact!" Thomas Martin shouted, scrambling for cover. Sarah's reaction was pure instinct. In one fluid motion, she abandoned the medical check, swung her rifle up, and pivoted toward the threat. Her breathing slowed automatically as she acquired the first target. Crack! The lead fighter dropped immediately, a perfect center mass shot. Crack! The second hostile fell backward, weapon tumbling from lifeless hands. Crack! The third man collapsed before he could radio their position. 3 shots. 3 kills. Less than 4 seconds. The echo of gunfire faded, leaving a stunned silence among the Green Berets. Robert Davis and David Evans exchanged wide-eyed glances. Thomas stared with his mouth slightly open. Even William, who'd been questioning her since the beginning, seemed momentarily speechless. The technical sergeant calmly ejected her spent cartridges, reloaded, and resumed her position as if nothing extraordinary had happened. John broke the silence, his voice all business, despite the shock evident on his face. "How far to the ravine?" he asked, nodding toward the eastern slope. 800 meters, Sarah replied without hesitation. "There's cover most of the way if we follow the dry creek bed." She shouldered her weapon and moved to the front of the group, her confidence unwavering. The team fell in behind her, following her lead without question. Even William, whose suspicion had temporarily given way to a grudging respect. As they moved single file through the rocky terrain, Robert helped Michael along, supporting the lieutenant's weight. David kept watch on their 6, while Thomas stayed close to John, clearly rattled by their narrow escape. "I've never seen shooting like that outside of Delta," John murmured to William as they navigated a particularly treacherous section. The staff sergeant nodded grimly. That wasn't standard Air Force training. That was something else entirely. Ahead of them, Sarah moved with the practiced ease of someone intimately familiar with hostile territory, each step purposeful, each decision immediate. Whatever her secret was, it had kept them alive so far, but the questions were piling up faster than the bodies she'd left behind. The team moved in single file through the narrow ravine, with Sarah Brown taking point. Her eyes scanned every inch of the path ahead, her movements calculated and precise. 15 meters in, she suddenly raised her fist, the universal signal to halt. The Green Berets froze instantly. Sarah crouched low, her gaze fixed on something the others couldn't see. She motioned John Smith forward with 2 fingers. When the sergeant approached, she pointed to a nearly invisible wire stretched across the path at ankle height. "Tripwire," she whispered. "Connected to claymores, probably. Would have taken out half the team." John's eyes narrowed as he studied the deadly trap. Even with his extensive training, he missed it completely. He signaled the others to stay back, while Sarah carefully marked the danger zone with small rocks. "How the hell did you spot that?" William Miller demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. The staff sergeant's suspicion had been growing with each passing minute. "That wire's practically invisible." Sarah ignored him, focusing instead on finding a safe route around the trap. Every movement she made spoke of experience far beyond what her official role suggested. She navigated the terrain like someone who'd spent years in hostile territory, not like a pararescue medic whose job was to evacuate the wounded. Robert Davis helped Michael Johnson maneuver around the tripwire, the lieutenant's face pale with pain but determined. Thomas Martin watched Sarah with undisguised awe, while David Evans kept his weapon trained on their back trail. "I asked you a question, Technical Sergeant," William persisted, refusing to be ignored. Sarah finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. "My father taught me," she said simply, then continued forward. The mention of her father silenced William temporarily. The team followed her lead, each step deliberate on the treacherous path. As they moved, Sarah's mind drifted to memories of her father, a special forces operator who'd spent weekends teaching his daughter everything he knew. The way he'd shown her how to spot disturbances in soil, the slight reflection of light on metal, the patterns that didn't belong in nature. "Watch for what doesn't fit," he'd always said. That's what'll save your life one day. He died in action when Sarah was 19, leaving behind a legacy she'd sworn to honor. Now each life she saved was a tribute to him, each notch on her rifle a promise kept. John moved up beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You've been here before," he stated rather than asked. Sarah didn't confirm or deny it. She simply pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. "That's our next cover point. 300 meters beyond that is the extraction zone." Behind them, William watched with narrowed eyes, piecing together a puzzle that was becoming clearer with each passing moment. The trench provided blessed cover, its walls rising high enough to shield them from enemy spotters. The team collapsed against the earthen barrier, breathing heavily, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. Technical Sergeant Sarah Brown scanned the perimeter, her movements precise and economical, nothing wasted. "We're clear for now," she announced, already checking Lieutenant Michael Johnson's bandages. The wounded officer nodded gratefully as she adjusted the dressing. Sergeant John Smith watched her work, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he gestured her aside, away from the others. "We need to talk about how a rescue jumper drops hostiles at 2 clicks and knows the region better than my own intel," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's hands stilled. The moment she dreaded had arrived. For years, she'd maintained her cover, playing the role assigned to her: pararescue, medic, support personnel. Never the shooter, never the operator. That facade had crumbled today with each pull of the trigger. "Your team needed help," she replied simply. Staff Sergeant William Miller edged closer, his earlier skepticism hardening into suspicion. "No medic I've ever met shoots like that, or navigates hostile territory like they were born to it." Sarah held John's gaze for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she reached into her vest and pulled out a weathered patch. Its edges frayed from years of being carried close to her heart. William's eyes widened in recognition. "That's Sierra Team," he breathed, disbelief coloring his voice. The patch, a simple black triangle with a silver star, meant nothing to Private Thomas Martin or Specialist David Evans, but the senior members of the team straightened instinctively. "Sierra Team was deactivated years ago," John said carefully. "After Kandahar." Sarah nodded. "Officially, yes." Robert Davis looked between them, confusion evident. "Someone want to fill us in?" "Sierra was a ghost unit," William explained, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "Deep reconnaissance, high-value target elimination. The story said they could hit targets other teams couldn't even approach." "My father was Sierra team leader," Sarah said quietly. "When he died, I inherited his mission. Some of us stayed operational, under different covers, different divisions." John studied her face. 23 notches on your rifle. 23 teams brought home," she confirmed, "including yours today." Specialist Robert whistled softly. "So you're not just a medic." "I am a medic," Sarah corrected. "But I'm also the insurance policy when everything goes wrong." She tucked the patch away. And today, everything went wrong. The revelation settled over the team like a physical weight. Sarah Brown wasn't just a rescue jumper who happened to be good with a rifle. She was a legend, a ghost, the heir to a legacy few even knew existed, and the only reason any of them were still alive.